So I'm not actually completely making this up as I go. I have a vague idea of this story already, and I haven't written it out yet. So this was just kind of an experiment. So part 2. So Umal is awoken to find he's being helped by a strange figure. He can't actually get up, he's too weak from his fall. As the rain pours down harder, the strange figure carries him through the clefts in the rock and through the long winding valleys of Lokat'Khine. He notices deep in the shadows of the creature's hood that it has vaguely humanoid features. But he can't quite be sure, because the shadows of the gigantic collapsible hood are much too deep. He thinks he makes out just the glinting of a pair of eyes. They walk for a long ways until finally, through a gap in the mountains, he can see high above them on a cliff, clinging to the edge so they could only be visible from one angle through this many-faceted canyon. A strange building, almost built into the cliff, low and squat with slit-like windows. Thick, heavy walls, the kind of walls you'd expect to find on some kind of hidden military base, or any building trying to survive on a planet where Kajir Loth roam free. The cloaked figure takes him through a small doorway in the rock, and they wind through a long, windy tunnel up a stair, in and out of the cliff at alternate points, so that sometimes they are walking up the stairs inside the cliff, and sometimes on the outside. It's dizzying. And finally Umal passes out again. When he awakes, he's in a low-ceilinged room on a narrow, uncomfortable bed. There are no windows looking outside. The architecture is strange and square, and there's a low doorway leading out. I don't know, I guess this is a bed, he's not in it, but anyway, you get the idea. Almost as if his waking has set an alarm off somewhere, the door opens, and in comes another one of these strange cloaked figures bearing a tray of food. He again notices the strange, collapsible hood that goes down over their backs, extending their bodies like a giant backpack. Their hands are human, but gloved, and you can see this time in the dim lighting from the, I almost said glow globes, but that's what they're called in Dune, so we had to come with something else. The light fixtures. Anyway, you can see that there's a human inside this strange, deep hood. He is a burden monk, he tells Umal. He does not tell him what his name is, though, only that he is one of the burden monks, and this is their secret monastery. Umal has been to Lokat'Khine before and trapped Kajir Loth, and he has never heard of this monastery. He's never heard of anyone on Lokat'Khine other than a few hideouts for smugglers or bandits or space pirates. But those are usually temporary dwelling places. This place is obviously permanent. Umal has only broken his ribs, and after a couple of days he is able to get up and go outside and look about. There's a courtyard, but it is narrow, and there are big stone spines that curve inward over this ceiling, over the roof of the, here, get a better angle, over the roof of the narrow courtyard, so that the actual space into the sky is even narrower. So, Umal suspects, if a Kajir Loth were to climb up to this cliff or down and find this monastery, and someone happened to be outside in the courtyard, it wouldn't be able to get inside and get them. There are burden monks all over the place, in all the narrow, low-ceilinged halls, marching about, doing who knows what, daily tasks of the monastery, in and out of the many, many doors. His nameless companion takes him to see the archmonk, who also does not seem to have a name. He is only called the archmonk, and he looks just like all the others. He wears an identical robe, but he has a shimmering veil hanging over his hood opening. His gloves are thick, like mittens. His voice is strange and silky, and Umal wonders if perhaps he's not entirely human. The archmonk tells him that he is welcome to stay until he is fully rested. Umal asks about the burden that these burden monks carry, and he says it is on all of their backs. Umal asks what it is, but the archmonk will not really say. He will only say that it is an honor to carry this burden. After this, Umal notices more monks wandering about, also with veils in their hoods. He also sees a door deep in the monastery. All the other doors, except for the ones leading outside, are open or else lack actual doors. They're just openings. But this one is not. He wonders if it leads deeper into the cliff, and he asks, and they say that it is not a place that he is allowed to go. It is the inner sanctum of the burden monks. One day, Umal, tired of the thick, incense-scented air inside the monastery, he really needed to get back to his ship, but somehow he has broken his communicator device when he'd fallen. He wondered if perhaps his ship had left without him. This was a terrifying thought. He talked to his nameless monk friend and asked if they had any means of communicating beyond the monastery. But they didn't. He wanted to see the cliffs outside. He tried one of the doors leading out, but it was locked. They were all locked. When he returned to his room, he found something on his bed. And it was not something he wanted to see. It was a robe, like the ones that the monks wore. His nameless friend came in and he said, "What is this doing here?" burden monk told him that he was to join them. He said he did not want to become a monk, and Umal grew angry, but the monk just turned and silently left. Umal raced around the monastery looking for a way out, but again, no doors opened. Strangely, there didn't seem to be any monks about. He returned to his room and found that the robe was gone. Still no sign of any of the monks. And then there was a gong somewhere deep inside the cliff, trembling through the rock. And then it was silent. He stepped out into the courtyard, and it was empty, and all the doors were locked, except for the door into the inner sanctum. There was no one guarding it, so Umal pressed his palm against it, and it creaked inward, opening into a dark hallway. Down which he could barely see. He called out, "Is anyone in there?" There was no sound, so he stepped cautiously inside. Finally, he came to a stair and descended. There was a faint greenish light ahead, and soon he found himself on a balcony overlooking a wide, vaulted space, like a cathedral. There even appeared to be an altar at the end, a tall, golden shape. The entire place was empty. He could not make out what kind of writing was on the huge golden rectangle at the end of the cathedral. So he took the little staircase that went down, and he walked up to the golden rectangle. It's actually more of like a hexagon. Good grief, I had to count the sides. Hexagon. 6 sides is a hexagon. And it was inscribed with strange symbols, unlike any he had ever seen before. Some of them were almost pictures, but he couldn't quite make them out. They didn't seem quite like people, nor did they seem like any kind of monster he had ever seen, and he had seen many monsters. Then the gong resounded, and it was much, much closer. He wheeled around, and he saw up on the balcony where he had just been a whole host of the monks, watching him silently. He turned back around, and there was someone emerging around the side of the hexagon. It was one of the veiled burden monks, possibly the archmonk, although it was impossible to tell. The archmonk, or whoever it was, pulled back their veil, but he could still see nothing in the shadows of its hood. And then, with its strange gloved hands, it began to pull back the hood itself. And then Umal saw why the hood was so large and so square, and why they hid their faces and their hands. The creatures beneath were not human at all. One of the silent monks had come up behind Umal. It was carrying an empty robe. There were more of them behind it. He couldn't back away from the golden hexagon. "I don't want to become a monk," he said. The alien creature, with its horrifying face that would have made someone who wasn't as used to horrifying faces as Umal scream and probably faint. But it was just another monster face to Umal. Until the hexagon opened. It was dark inside, but there was something... Well, there were some things, many things inside. But there was one on a pedestal in front. Almost like an egg. And the horrifying creature pulled the egg from within the hexagon. And Umal suddenly saw that the horrifying head was not entirely alien. Somewhere beneath it, there was a human. But the skin had gone a strange color, and the lips did not move when the creature spoke. It said, "Be still," and it broke the egg. The burdened monks seized Umal while the egg hatched open to reveal some kind of larval stage of the archmonk. Now Umal screamed, but it was too late. The archmonk placed the larva on top of his bald Aegon head, and the tendrils plunged into his ears and along his spinal cord. And the creature on top of his head said, "Thank you for carrying me." And I guess that is the end. And I will try to write this story out at some point with, more details and better descriptions and better overall pacing. And maybe some better pictures. And maybe a better ending.